Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of SDRescue. I think it's episode 35 now. We're more than halfway through on our way to a year. Once again, I'm joined by Grayson Fulbright, email copywriting extraordinaire, live from Vietnam. Grayson, how are you doing this fine day or evening for you?
I'm doing quite well. It's 10:30 p.m. where I'm from right now, and I'm really excited. We actually have two rewrites that we'll be diving into for this episode. So what that means, for those of you who are new joining us, that means Austin and myself have both kind of given different angles here. And keep in mind that Austin is kind of going on one track, trying to talk about one of the ways that a rep can get an email done, while I kind of took a different track. So just keep an open mind and kind of see the different ways that you can take the email that we're going to be reviewing today.
Yeah, and this is a good place to examine two different philosophies, right? We're looking at I wanted to continue our little string on follow-up emails, and a lot of people, we've both expressed previously on the show that we don't particularly like follow-up emails. I mean, breakup emails. We've done a couple. And today I fell on the sword. I wrote a breakup email. Personally, I didn't really like it. I didn't like writing it or how it came out, but I do want to have empathy for reps that are kind of trapped in that, where they have a manager or somebody or an executive that says, hey, I don't know about you, but we write breakup emails here. Because I think, just to talk a little bit about breakup emails before we jump into the actual email, is the philosophy is it's this short-sighted grab where you used to be able to write kind of captivating stuff and give people options. And the response rate historically, back when I was an SDR 10, 11 years ago or whatever it was, people would actually, you would get some people that would be the highest reply rate of the sequence, right? The pick an option, is it A, B, or C? Are you not interested right now? Is the timing wrong? Or, oh, I want to meet, schedule a meeting, and that email. And I think that spurred this executive behavior, because the people making decisions now in writing templates or writing sequences are writing those emails. And it just doesn't, it never, I don't know that it ever really left a good taste in somebody's mouth, but it is by far not that effective anymore from what our data says.
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to knock the use of breakup emails, and so I'm not going to really say that you shouldn't use them, because some people do still use them successfully to this day. But what I will say is I think the sales community has gone too far a little bit with this idea of kind of predictability in the top of funnel, in my opinion. And I think this is kind of a consequence of that, where we're seeing these kind of emails near the end of the sequence where, in the organization's eyes, the SDR should be wrapping up. Either they need to get the meeting, or they need to find it in their heart to lose the deal and move on. And it kind of almost forces that predictability, where it's like, yes, it's a very low conversion rate. Yes, it might, tick a bunch of people off, but it does what the business needs, which is get an outcome that they can document and then move the SDR to a new opportunity. And I think that's really what we're kind of diving into here. While we'd be looking at two kind of different styles of emails that you can use near the end of a sequence, I would just keep in mind that, there are ways that you can end a sequence with breakup emails and get success. There are ways that you can do it without breakup emails. We're going to kind of look at both sides during this episode.
Yeah, and remember, Grayson and I are both, and this is really big in the enterprise sale. And I think Grayson is one of the foundational pillars to how he writes, and why I really like doing the show with him, is because he wants to get the meeting, he wants to get the yes, and he does everything in his power to get it, but not at the expense of ruining a future yes. And I think that that's a good philosophy, and it's really tough to be a sales rep and go into a new territory where somebody has carpet bombed your prospect list. And, it's like a forest fire, right? Where it's all ash. You have to wait years before it grows back, and some companies do that to them. They black mark the entire industry against them, based off bad email, and I think that if a poorly executed breakup email can definitely do that. And a poor cold outreach strategy in general can do that. And so that's what we want to try and avoid here on the show, is get you more yeses and that may be now on the sequence you're running, or it might be in the future. So that's the important thing here. So I'm going to get into what the original email was here. So this is the email I received. Now, this email is, I didn't count the exact number, but I've received more than 6 emails from this sender. So needless to say, it's pretty far along in the sequence. And so this is obviously they're not getting any traction with me. I haven't responded or done anything at all. It's been complete radio silence. So that's the approach I took on the rewrite, and the situation on how I approached it. So this is, hi Austin, hope your day's going well. I've sent you several emails recently, but I haven't heard anything back from you. So I just wanted to check in to see if you've had a chance to read through any of my emails and if you have any questions. All right, color coding. Oh, I'm glad Grayson recolor coded this, because I just colored it all orange. I didn't even bother coloring hope your day is going well, but you did, so I appreciate it. So yeah, I mean, look, it's really simple to break down this. And the reason why, so this email is a little bit more basic and a little bit more egregious in the things that it does than a lot of emails I get. But the problem is that I get so many variations of this that I know a lot of reps out there are doing it. And I don't know why I blame the management. Anytime a rep does something, I blame the management, because I'm in management. And anytime a rep does something, it's my fault at my job. So I'm going to blame the management here and say, hey, management should train him better. But, you know, I just don't know. There's a lot of variations of this, and this isn't an Agoji email, right? This is way late. It's not saying, hey, by the way, did you catch this? It's this, I'm here. I've sent you a lot of emails, but I haven't heard anything. Do you have questions? You know, is there some, right? You're just like grasping at straws kind of email. And there's a lot of variations of it, but at the end of the day, that's the core of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one note I wanted to make when I first read this email is that the first line I've used. And I think the point I want to make here is I don't think I've ever used this line in cold outreach. If I've got a buyer or sorry, a prospect, you know, post discovery, we've had some conversations, they potentially want a proposal and we need to get on a follow-up call to talk details, and they don't respond back to me, I might send an email like this. If, you know, we've got someone who is close to closing, maybe they're reviewing the contract and, you know, there's some sort of like radio silence going on or some indecision, I might send an email like this. And the point I'm trying to make is that there's times and places, I think, within kind of like a business conversation or a business relationship when you can leverage kind of manipulation and guilt. For instance, if they've gone through a sales process with you, and that organization has had their employees spend the time to investigate this with your brand, that's time invested. That's time spent. They probably wouldn't want to miss an email from you. But kind of backing up into what we're looking at here, this is a cold email from somebody who this rep doesn't know and has so far received radio silence from. And so those two perspectives, I think, are very different, and reps mix that up so often. I feel like salespeople often think that it's at any time they can kind of deploy this as a tactic and it might work, might not. And I would make the argument that no, I would say that these types of tactics where it's like, hey, I've been reaching out to you, but I noticed you haven't responded, or like, hey, I've been giving you calls and wanted to see if you've read any or like listened to any of our voicemails. There's a time and place for that, but I would say that it's definitely not in the time when they don't trust you yet. Because if you're trying to make someone guilty and they don't know you and they don't trust you, it's like the same thing as someone saying, I don't like people that are dramatic. I don't like dealing with drama. It's the same thing. If a leader who has a whole job and a whole team to manage sees someone trying to guilt trip you into reading their email, auto spam, auto delete, right? Like no one wants to deal with that. And so I just say, be careful in terms of like how you're trying to leverage social capital or leverage past experiences with the buyer or the prospect to actually get them to notice. Because there's awareness driven by interest or curiosity, and then there's awareness driven by annoyance. And that's why often people get awesome open rates and then get 15, 20% unsubscribe rates and not understand why.
Yeah, that's a good point. And look, and I'll even go a step further. I think sales reps who do this in the sales process didn't do a good job in the meeting. There's a missing piece. Like if you're a professional, you've set up next steps, and hopefully, like, look, here's the thing: is as salespeople, once you've had the ghosting and on enough deals, you start to preempt it in the meeting, right? You start to tie down things like, okay, let's set a date for a next meeting, and let's do this, that. There's a bunch of like fail safes to avoid ever falling into this trap in a sales process, even if you don't have a good shot at winning it. And so Keegan talks about this a lot in gap selling, right? A lot of it comes down to like discovery and tying things to what they're doing in their business, et cetera, and having thorough discovery and really thorough disqualification. Like, that's something you're really good at, Grayson. You talk about that a lot, is you qualify really hard as a part of the prospecting and wholesale process. So I just think that there are ways to avoid it. And if you're in the position where you're trying to like guilt somebody into following up with you, like there are so many other things you could have done to preempt that situation. And so for me, at least, it's a mark of a more, now look, there are people that are just going to ghost you even if you do all this stuff right. So you could still be in this situation, but at least from my perspective, if you've taken some work to preempt it, it should never be just this plain yogurt. Hey, do you have any questions? What are your thoughts? You should have some context in that email. This is obviously a prospecting email. So maybe we should do one of that. I have a bunch of those recently because we did a bunch of vendor evaluations, and where the salespeople came, like a lot of them just came and just like vomited their product and like, all right, cool. Hope you guys liked it, and left. And then they sent a bunch of emails afterwards. We're like, hey, do you have any questions? Hey, do you have any questions? Hey, haven't heard back. Do you have any questions? And I'm just like, dude, you can't send that 3 times. I was surprised they didn't do anything in the meeting. That's a different topic, but I'm just saying is that this is like, it's so pervasive in sales that it can be prospecting. It can be follow up in a sales process. It can even be with signed customers. Hey, I want to check back in and see if you have any questions is the nice disguise for, hey, I want to nag you, but I'm trying to veil it as being polite. Ultimately.
Yeah. And to hop into that second line, that this is the part that I really don't like. And the reason why is because I think that one critical part of emails, when you're sending it to somebody top of funnel, trying to start a conversation, is you have to get to the point quickly about like, why me, why you, why now, why should we be doing this? And it's very important that you guide prospects to these realizations and to these next steps. It's always dangerous, always risky, always low converting when you leave prospects to their own devices and let them find their way through inbound into your sales process. And so with that in mind, let's break down what this person said here. They said, 1, they wanted to check in to see if you've read through any of my emails. And 2, they wanted to see if you have any questions. And I want to point out, both of these have zero context that either differentiates them and their brand or differentiates the conversation that they've been trying to have. If a leader who, I'm sure you can agree with this or empathize with this, Austin, but if you're a leader and you're getting sold to, you probably get 10 to 15 emails a month from the same like vendor space, like 15 of the same companies trying to sell you the same thing. And that's just looking at one space.
Oh,
and
yeah, definitely.
When leaders have to review these conversations, which not a lot of them want to do anyway, they want it to be quick. They don't want this to be like a mental exercise to go look through their inbox and research your past emails and see if they can remember anything interesting or try to identify a topic that's relevant. It's very rare that you will find a leader that A, has the time, and B, actually has the heart to go do that for a seller. And so what you need to do is be very clear in the email what you're talking about and what you want. And so instead of saying, if you've had a chance to read through any of my emails, maybe I would reposition that to talk about the specific topics you brought up. And then maybe instead of asking if you have any questions, maybe propose a specific next step that can actually give prospects something to visualize. Because from here, from what I see, it's one of the worst emails that you can send, Because even if you had a great intro, even if you were super relevant and did your research, a lot of times these types of endings and emails will just kind of leave people to be like, oh, okay, well, interesting. I guess I'll find time to dig in and get there when I get there, because it's too difficult to find a good starting place to actually engage in the sales conversation. So I'd say regardless of what type of email this was, regardless of how the intro was done, that's why CTAs exist. There's a reason why calls to action exists, is to give prospects very, very clear directions in terms of where they can go and what their time would look like if they spent it with your brand. And so I'd say use call to actions. Don't be ambiguous like this.
Yeah. Can we just make a point to say before I move on to the rewrites? This email could be from any person at any company in any industry. Like, look, I went in there. I was like, all right, I got to anonymize this. And I go, I don't have anything to anonymize. Like, it is that generic. Like, just look, you could copy and paste this in from any vendor or from any, you could even put this could be internal for all I know if I read this. Hey, Austin, I sent you a bunch of emails recently. Haven't heard anything back from you. Just want to check and see if you had any questions. That could be from like somebody in another department in my own company. I just, you know what I mean? It's just like one of those things. Whereas like that, it just doesn't have a place in the sales process. If this is an internal email, especially from a superior or from like somebody that could be like parallel to you on the org chart that doesn't necessarily have, like direct reporting to, you don't report to directly, doesn't have authority over you. Like I could see somebody sending an email like this to be polite and nag, because, it's kind of how you do it internally, is you politely nag people or their boss about things that need to get done. But, it just doesn't work in sales. It's not compelling and it's offensive. I don't like it when people do it internally, but it's something you have to tolerate. But, the real secret is to just get your work done and then nobody does it. But in the sales process, it just doesn't work. It really doesn't invoke any sort of emotion. So, the rewrites, I took it on myself to try and write one of these, and it induced nausea, but like if I had to, send one, then this is what I rewrote, and we'll look at Grayson's later, which is probably the right way to do stuff. So I'll write it. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and I'll read my email in a second, but I just want to break it up into chunks because there's a myriad of colors going on. The first thing I want to do is to summarize the entire sequence and show that I had a reason that I thought it would make sense to reach out, because I think that's the number one thing that most people do in a sequence is they don't eliminate that, right? A lot of it's feature spam or whatever. It's just, I was handed a list, I started emailing it, and that's what it is. That's a majority of emails I get. So first part is, I thought that because Nuarx was a managed service provider with a large, fast-growing customer base, that you could be experiencing some of the hassles associated with manual provisioning, complex billing to multiple vendors, or perhaps lacking some integrations in your solution stack. So it's all problems I've touched on before. So summarize those key areas that hopefully I mentioned somewhere else in the previous 8 emails or however many there were. It seems I was mistaken. I won't contact you anymore regarding these issues. Now, I don't really like saying I won't contact you anymore. I would probably, like, as I reread it, I'm like, it would make sense to just say, it seems I was mistaken. I really, in this situation, it's the only avenue that I can go down where Beck Holland is like the fall on the sword thing, where at least admit, all right, it looks like I was off the mark on these topics. I don't know about I won't contact you anymore. I don't really like that part now, reading it out loud. But anyway, and then I try to save it by saying, hey, despite my error, I'd still like to take 5 minutes, shake your hand virtually over beverage you're choosing. And then the link is to, everyone sends gift cards to me. It's like, hey, take a meeting. We're like, well, if you're going to spend the money on the gift card, at least make it like build your network or build your territory or whatever. Trying to get something out of this. If you have to break up with them, at least like progress somewhere, even if it's just knowing that person, because they could move companies, they could do something else in your industry or territory. You could see them at a show. And if you have some kind of interaction, my thought is most people are going to say no or completely ignore this email anyway, like they do most breakup emails, which is why, Grayson and I will tell you, you can even go back to past shows where we're like, yeah, we don't really send these. But at least this, if you do get 2 or 3 people that do, at least you've met 2 or 3 people in your industry that are decision makers that could refer you business or move to another company. Like you just get something out of it productive. If you're going to try and grasp for straws, because you're not grasping, at least in my opinion, if no one said anything to you after 8 emails, the timing's obviously just not right. That's my read anyway. And that 99% of the time, I think I'd be right that the timing just isn't good. So that's my rewrite. If you have to send a breakup email, I'm still, it just doesn't feel, it's really conflicting just because I feel like, it's desperate and grasping at straws, but at least it's a contextual grasp instead of a non-contextual grasp, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I can say about this that I like is that you're not putting the onus on the prospect, and you're not like making them feel guilty. I often get these emails to where it's like they almost act like, hey, I've been reaching out to you about this and I thought it'd be relevant, and you don't find it relevant, like very surprised.
Oh
and
yeah,
like
yeah, and it's like their fault that it's not relevant.
Yes. And so I like this approach to where it's at least you're actually falling on your own sword, not holding a sword and stabbing the prospect, right? You're actually saying, it seems that I'm admitting that I have a mistake, which, vulnerability can always be good in an email, because sometimes showing the human nature of business can sometimes lead to the conversations that you're talking about. So
I would still guess it's not going to get a better than 1 to 3% response rate. That's what I would, if I had to bet. Like nowhere, it's just not compelling enough. There's nothing compelling in it. And that's why I don't like breakup emails, is because it insinuates that there was something going on before, right? People are like, oh, well, you always got to leave the door open with a breakup email, leave the door open for the deal. I'm like, guys, let's make something clear. The door was never opened. The prospect didn't come to your door. First of all, that's called an inbound lead. Second of all, he didn't open the door to you. That would be a response. Third, right? All we did was pound on somebody's door and them not answer, right? I say this, it's a human pop-up ad. That's it, with no X, except unsubscribe. That's why people do that. And so like this notion, it's built off of this telemarketing notion from the 70s and 80s that like, oh, you hold on, don't let it go, keep pushing and always be closing and always get the deal, right? That it's off that note. It's that pedigree in the prospecting that like there's some you're telling me there's a chance. No, the chance is 0.0000001%, and there's an almost 100% chance that you're going to offend them anyway. So I don't know, but you're right. At least at this point, I'm saying it's my fault, not the prospects, which is frequent in these types of emails. So yeah. So now that we've looked at an all right way to do it, can we look at a better way? Should we?
Call it better way, a different way. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, it's a different philosophy. What I purport as a better philosophy. Well, I'll say that, in my opinion. So would you like me to read it, or would you want to read it? Yeah, I felt like I just talked a lot. So if you want to read it, that'd be awesome.
I got it. Cool. So my rewrite was, I tried to keep a lot of what Austin had used in his rewrite the same, just kind of adjusted it to kind of tell a different story. So, hey, Austin, Newarks manages a lot of customers as a MSP. So I imagine your team is quite familiar with the nightmares of manual provisioning, vendor billing, and the constant need for new tech integrations. We regularly collaborate with subject matter experts in the IT and cybersecurity space to create content and host events that help managed service providers improve customer experiences. Would you recommend anyone at Newarks that might be interested in being a panelist for our next event? Alternatively, I'd also be happy to share resources on any topics your team might find interesting.
Nice. See, I actually like this one. So I like your call to action because it just shows that you can ask somebody. So a lot of people, like Jake Dunlap and people are saying, hey, DM your prospects and have them on your podcast, right? There's a lot of that going around. There's a lot of influencers saying, hey, invite your prospects to make content. And I think that will get saturated eventually. I don't know that there are a ton of people actually doing it, but eventually that's going to burn out. But what you've shown is there's a way you can ask somebody to participate in content without having to ask them to participate in content. Having somebody refer someone to do it is probably even better, frankly, because then that person's be like, oh yeah, Jim told me to do it. And I like Jim, and Austin, nice to meet you. Jim said we should connect and be a host on this podcast. instead of like, hey Jim, do you want to be on the podcast? So yeah, I really like your, just like there's this notion that gets the CTAs can't be dynamic. Like if you send someone an email that the CTA has to be about them, it doesn't. I mean, it is still about them, but because you're asking for a referral from them. It's so much easier. It's these low barrier to entry CTAs that get replies, or ways where they can be a help to you. That's why you email somebody. It's because you have a good reason. Hey, you need their help, and you're not trying to get them to buy from you. That's what gets you replies, and that's all about part of being in the industry and the community.
Yeah,
so peers do that.
I think one thing I also tried to show here is kind of how to play different stakeholders, because this is more of a kind of a high level thing I did, but I know, I don't know if this rep knew, but I know that Austin leads sales. So I knew writing this email that, while his team might be familiar with all these nightmares, I almost guarantee Austin doesn't do any of this directly. And so like, and that happens sometimes, where it's like, sometimes you're talking to people who are like involved in the customer experience, or involved in X, or involved in Y, but their specialty is weird. So like talking to them about your product is a little bit irrelevant. And so this is a way to get around it. I know that Austin leads sales. I know his company is an MSP and he has IT leaders. So I'm diving into the sales team to talk really about kind of like, hey, this might be a source of new customers for you guys. That's kind of the hidden seed of this, is like, while he might refer me and while he might be interested in the content, what I'm hoping the sales persona we'll get out of this email is, ooh, this looks like a chance where we might be able to actually source some new leads. And all it'll take is me reaching out to my CTO or me reaching out to my VP of tech. And I think that is another way that you can kind of play on personas and have these little hidden seeds where it's like, I know my persona is this way or this way. And so if I can position a message that makes them think about this, then I can maybe get to this stakeholder, or maybe even get both of them on a meeting or both of them on a demo. So I'll always be aware of how your stakeholders are different, because I wouldn't send this email to the CTO of Newarks. I also wouldn't send this email to the CEO of Newarks. I would have different emails depending on the persona I'm targeting within that account. And so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that this is also a good way to approach it if you're not quite sure what who the recipient is. Some companies have confusing titles, especially when you get into really big companies. You get really specific titles, in the enterprise, where you may not be, you don't want to reach out to the COO of Intel. They're not going to help you probably. For the COO of Intel to get on a meeting with you, you better be freaking important. Of all of Intel, of global Intel, right? Like that's a big ask. And there's times where you're like, does this person do it? I've got 2 or 3 people here that could be my person, but I don't know. You could, but if you have a general person, like this is a really good way to play that too, where you write something like this that where it doesn't really exclude anybody, but seeks to, play off of what you think they do and how they might interact. So I think it's a really good example for that, because guess what? Even with cookie cutter titles, what the actual execution of their job looks like may be very different. Like somebody that's a director of product, for example, in Newarks, could be very different. What they actually do could be very different than what a director of product at another software company. So that there's all those little nuances, and guess what? You'll never know. But if you can word an email like this, where it plays on a couple of different themes and you can play on people interacting, that's what you want. You want motion inside that account. That's how you get meetings, is people get your emails and they talk internally and they invite you in.
Exactly.
That's expert level stuff, Grayson. Like this is the top tier of the echelon. You don't, as soon as you start talking about, the actual molecular particle physics of getting people to interact, that's the good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the advice I can leave everyone with is that tends to be the way that I think when I'm like doing outreach and trying to generate meetings, is I always think in buckets of like, who are the types of people I'm talking to? Who are the types of companies I'm talking to? It's very rare, unless you're doing account-based stuff or enterprise stuff, where you'll actually have the time and the blessing to spend or invest in these accounts a lot and know everybody and figure it out. And so what you need to do is you need to master your industry and say, listen, every company is unique and different, but about 10 to 15 different types of companies come around. And so if I can just understand those different types, I can create messaging around those different 15 and hopefully capture as much market as possible. And same thing can be said of different personas.
And I think that it is 12. So I do want this to be our parting thought here before we wrap up. That's really important. If you're an SDR right now and you're watching this and you're wondering, hey, I want to book more meetings. If you really want to book a lot of meetings, you need to learn how people in an account will typically interact with each other for there to be a meeting to get created. The days of like solo prospecting into some decision maker and them giving you time isn't going to happen. As much, it's diminishing. You have to be really, really good to be able, and it has to, they typically have to be in market or curious about exploring that. You could have something novel. You might be a new product or something, but if you can figure out how to play other decision makers and subordinates, not against each other, but how to get them to collaborate, and that's going to create meetings. You want to create a meeting, not ask for a meeting. And I think that's a really good takeaway. And we should probably touch on that a little more, Grayson. I think it would be really good to look at how to take an email that's very single threaded and how to multi-thread your emails, kind of like this right here. Because at the enterprise, that's the only way to get a big deal done, because you have to get all these departments and multiple business units frequently to collaborate. And we won't even talk about getting something through legal or purchasing, right? There's just so many things to get done to actually get the deal signed. Right. And guess what? The thing is that the B2B decision is only seemingly trending bigger. Companies are only getting bigger. I don't know. So,
right. Well, I'd be happy to. I'd say while we're signing off, anyone, if you are kind of targeting multiple stakeholders or are kind of managing deals that are a little bit more complex, and you want to send over an email for us to anonymously review, I think that would be a fun one to dive into, and kind of maybe looking at how you can adjust messaging based on the persona. But for now, it looks like we have to sign off. We're already 2 minutes late, but make sure to subscribe. We'll be back Monday, every Monday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. And make sure to send us your emails if you have them. We'd love to review. You can even come join us for the show.
Thanks, everybody.